All right, and this one we're talking about Nietzsche's famous quote from the late 1800s, the old philosopher, that God is dead and we killed him. Now, I do find it ironic that if you look back through history, ever since he's made that statement, and especially as it's risen in popularity, the world seems to have gone downhill quite a bit. But I want to break that down just a little bit, because in that assessment of his statement, I know what he's trying to say. He's trying to say the base idea of God is in our head, or it's just the fairy tale solution, which, again, if you're looking for a fairy tale to make you feel better about dying, there's other things to look at that would be far more comforting than traditional Christianity. So I've never overly understood that argument either. I've always found it to be kind of illogical. But that idea of it's in our head, or you got Dawkins' flying spaghetti monster, Santa Claus, right? The idea would be that first it would have to exist. Then we killed it. The first question I always want to ask is, if God, and I think this term is very generic in this case, I think Nietzsche was going after the Christian God, but to just say God, when you look at a lot more of the context that he was talking about, the idea of a God, is dead. How did we kill him? Let's assume he was truly talking about the living God. Then how did we kill him? Now, if it is just that figment of our imagination, just an idea, then we killed him because we finally hit a point of intellectual intelligence that allowed us to think we were so vain as to supersede this idea. And we need to get past that because we're more enlightened. I'll take the argument at face value, but again, I'm going to go back to one of my earlier statements. If that is the case and we think we're so freaking enlightened, I question why the world seems to be falling into more and more chaos and disarray and craziness, as opposed to more and more harmony since that peace has happened. So, could we have killed God? Well, again, that would require the fact that we would have the strength and ability to overcome the creator of all things. We know God is eternal. God has predated our existence and the existence of the creation, and he will long postdate that. God does not live within space-time. He created space-time. Time, if you really want to go down a mind trip, look into time not being linear as far as how we use it, hours, minutes, days, years progressing. Time can be more complex than that, but I'll save that for another time. No pun intended there. So as we're starting to assess this, we would have to have assumed that all of that went into play, that it didn't actually play out that way, and that we were capable of killing it. I think there's a much larger thing at play here, and that is my argument for many, many years has been, this is the lie that hell is using today. If they can get the world to accept that there is no God, or the idea of God is dead, or something like that, then you can't have a bunch of demons running around possessing people frequently. And I think that's why Hollywood has even oversimplified and bastardized that. And those of you that have talked to me a lot know my thoughts on possession versus oppression and the commonality there. But I think that's really what we're seeing, right? We see much more oppression in multiple different disorders. I'm sure there are real disorders. I'm not doubting that or saying that everyone is a demon, but we do know that oppression is a very real thing. So they've played a different game, because otherwise they'd have to acknowledge, if we're here, God's there. So play the lie, and inevitably you can get a large swath of people to not believe in any kind of culture. We saw this a lot in some of the European countries that were run by the Russians and the Germans. Don't quote me on this, but I want to say it was, you know what, I don't even want to say the country. I know that there was a country, and I will find it and bring it up next time I use this, but there's a country that up until the 80s was notorious for having religious statues, but because they were under Russian rule for so long and weren't allowed to have any other kind of religion, they're actually an incredibly atheistic country. But I don't want to misused the wrong country in that. So I'll find that. So Satan's utilizing this lie in order to perpetuate that there is no God, and in that there is no hope. And then at some point I feel he will try, if not already trying, to implement himself as God, which is what he's always tried to accomplish. Really what we have to get to is the hard question in this, which is, if we are taking this from a biblical standpoint and somebody's saying God's dead and we killed him, or some variation of that, the question really comes down to two parts. One, was Jesus God, which is another video we'll hit on another time, and more importantly, did Jesus rise from the dead? We know that God is the eternal God, the living God, that Christ did raise from the dead, and that in that, even if we want to get technical, I've seen some folks do this, no, Jesus in a death sense was not killed by man. His bodily form, his human form was killed. We don't understand past that, but we do know he died. We do know he rose. We do know he came back. But he also allowed that to happen. We didn't overpower, conquer him. He surrendered to that death willingly. He makes the whole point. It would, if I wanted to, I could command 10,000 angels to come and take care of this. So, that's not really a fair argument in that sense, but it really does come back to those verses of, did Jesus rise, and is God really living? And those are the verses I challenge you to go and look for and grab in this. I've mentioned a few. I didn't quote them specifically, but I mentioned a couple of references to them. I'll tell you, this one was really difficult for me to get to because it took more of playing in the philosophical realm than actually getting to biblical truth. But that is where that goes. Either there was a God and we killed him. How could we have done that? God was ever just a figment of our imagination and we killed that thought process, in which case we can prove that God's alive, and that breaks that down. Or the thought is truly that in Christ dying, we killed him and he did not rise, which again is constantly proven to be incorrect. Not only was he seen by the people after he rose and his disciples, but the 500, and that was just at the one time. The numerous people that saw him over 40 days. I know there's different accounts of just how many, but well into the hundreds, if not thousands, depending on who's counting, how you count it, that saw him in various different times, in various different ways and interactions, and then seeing him ascend on the throne. And then we still see him at work alive today. Nietzsche's philosophical point, in my opinion, is self-assuming and arrogant. No matter which one of the 3 points we want to look at, it was an arrogant point that he was trying to make without evidence. There's no evidence that we, air quotes here, killed God. He's just throwing it out there. And it's one that stuck around. It's a great lie of hell that they continue to perpetuate, but it falls on its face as soon as we start to attack it with any kind of evidence. What evidence do we have that we killed it? Even if it was just the thought, because there are still billions of people that have a faith in a God in modern times. So, and very intelligent people that follow that or have a faith. So I don't know how that would have enlightened the masses past that point. So it was a very arrogant statement. I hate that it sticks around. It falls on its face the second you poke any holes at it or question it. If you go through and read the rest of, it was a part of a paper that eventually got put into a book that we all steal this quote out of. To me, it doesn't provide any additional context that would counter my argument here. I just think it was a very arrogant point that falls on its face. So with that, I'll leave you with this one. My challenge to everybody who's going to come to class is look up those verses of Christ raising, of God being alive, being eternal. Those prove over and over again. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.